This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here he is, the host of the podcast, AWR Hawkins.
Welcome to Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart news podcast focused on guns, gun rights, the Second Amendment. We sum these things up here each week under the banner of freedom. Always have and always will, and that's because an armed citizen is a free citizen. Those of you who reach out to me from Europe or from Canada, we talk about these things. They talk about looking on at America where Americans can defend themselves. And they talk about the things that they go through in their countries, either to acquire the simple firearm they're still able to acquire, the licensing and different hoops they have to jump through to make that happen, or they just talk about their inability to get a gun whatsoever. But I appreciate you guys who are in Europe and in Canada who are listening to the podcast. Appreciate you reaching out to me. Mark, who reaches out to me from Canada quite often. Thank you, buddy. Also this week, I need to give some shout outs to Marshall and Darius. Both of you guys, was good to visit with you this week and just get the feedback on the podcast. Surely appreciated it. Hope you guys are both having a great day. And I hope the circle of listeners expands as other people continue to learn about it. Thanks, Ed, for the email on the information in Alaska. Much appreciated. And just to all of you all who reached out to me this week. I know Mowbray reached out to me on Instagram a few times. Some of the videos I posted are photos of certain guns. So good to hear from you again, Mowbray, as always. Folks, if you don't follow me on Instagram, look it up at AWR_Hawkins. So at AWR_Hawkins. I put a lot of videos up each week shooting various guns on Instagram, photos of certain guns, different things. And I just do that kind of to keep a little media running there because it's interesting. I might talk to you about the Mossberg 590M, which I'm going to tell you right now is an incredible shotgun. I might talk to you about it, but it's a big difference if you could see me shooting with it and see how it works. We're talking about a pump shotgun that uses detachable magazines. The only way I could think of it is think of a pump shotgun that takes magazines in a fashion similar to an AR-15 or an AK-47. What? You're talking about a formidable weapon. Now, I use a 15-round magazine in it and a 20-round magazine. 20 rounds of 12 gauge. Now, if you were using double-aught buck, 20 rounds, holy cow. Holy cow. If someone comes through your front door, they just don't have a chance. They literally don't have a chance. I'm not even using a shot that size. I use 6-shot in it, and it is unbelievable. Check it out on Instagram. I take a watermelon in 6-shot. I pull the trigger, of course. There's no watermelon left, none. I like to, I set up a little field of targets and just walk through them and pump and pump and pump. I think I shoot 11, 12 rounds, but just trying to show this gun has more firepower than any other shotgun I've ever used personally. And it's very simple to use. After you run the mag out, you can just pop another mag in. So, it's great. Now, those of you, Lee, and the rest of you guys who reach out to me all the time who live in California, if they haven't banned the gun yet, they will. But until they do, it's an awful fun gun to shoot, and it is a serious campground weapon and a serious home defense weapon. I mean that. Serious. I can't really figure how you could need anything other than that if you were looking for something that you were going to lean against your bed at night for if something goes boom in the dark, all right? So it's there. Folks, we had a lot of news this week. Of course, I think paramount would be the shooting in Jacksonville. That incident was both over-reported and then inaccurately reported. And I'll explain. The number of victims and such, over-reported. The sheriff kept saying, hold on, folks. The media's getting these numbers wrong. And sure enough, there weren't as many either wounded or fatalities as reported originally. Now, I'm not taking away from the fatalities that did occur. Don't hear me wrong. I'm saying the tendency on the establishment media's part, the tendency is to over-report, to get the numbers as high as they can. That's the tendency. You got to guard against that. There is a sense of panic that comes over the gun owner. Uh-oh, this is it. This is going to push them over the edge. They're coming after my guns after this. And that's a natural tendency to feel that because the establishment media is so slanted against your freedom. Now, here's what happened. There was a competitor in a video game tournament. And just to be clear, I'm not putting down video games, not even hinting at that. To me, that's idiocy. Idiocy. He's at a video game tournament where they're playing Madden football. The sheriff identifies him as David Katz, a 24-year-old from Baltimore. Apparently, Katz secures a big win. He's a number 7 seed. He defeats a number 2 seed. He gets interviewed by EA Sports. The interview is available on social media. They're talking to him. Hey, man, you came in here and you were the number 7 seed. You upset the 2nd seed. I mean, it's like Katz has got it all. And then apparently he loses after that and just starts shooting people. That's it. He wounds 9. He kills 2. And then he takes his own life. All right? Now, here's the deal. Before we even knew how many were wounded or how many were killed or what type of weapon was used, before the buildings were even cleared, think about what I'm saying. SWAT was still in the buildings clearing them. When Moms Demand Action's Shannon Watts, who is just another Michael Bloomberg-funded leftist. She came out and started calling for gun control. Need more gun control. Well, we don't even know what kind of gun was used at that point. We don't know how many people were wounded, how many people were killed. We don't even know that there was only one suspect. SWAT's still clearing the building, not knowing if there were maybe more suspects than one. She's calling for gun control. All right? You have David Hogg. David Hogg, who I'm guessing has been dying for a little attention because, he had a lot of attention at first after the Parkland school shooting, and that kind of faded away, the attention did. And so he comes out real quick, pushing for more gun control and trying to shame Senator Marco Rubio. He sent a tweet to the extent of, how many lives will you tolerate being lost by mass shootings in your home state, yada, yada, yada. Now, folks, there's a lot here we got to unwrap. We really do. First thing, and we reported it at Breitbart, the mall, you may call it a shopping center, that's fine, but the mall in which the video game tournament was held is a gun-free zone. That's 100% gun control, folks. Just like we saw at Orlando Pulse, June 12, 2016. Just like we saw at the Parkland High School, February 14, 2018. Just like we saw at Sandy Hook Elementary, December 14, 2012. Just like we saw at the community college in Oregon on, I believe it was October 1st, 2015 or October 3rd, 2015. I could go on and on and on. Just like we saw at the D.C. Navy Yard on September 16th, 2013. Just like we saw at the Aurora Movie Theater, July 20th, 2012. All of these attacks take place in gun-free zones because the attackers by nature don't want anybody shooting back at them. I've said this before, but it's their moment. It's their moment where they can finally have power over others. It's their moment to dominate. And nothing ruins a good attempt at dominating, like an armed citizen who will shoot back and kill you dead. So they avoid that scenario. They want to be in control. So when Shannon Watts is sitting here calling for more gun control, she's completely ignoring and either A, suppressing, or B, didn't know, because she is not the brightest bulb in the house, folks. She's not. But Jacksonville Landing is a gun-free zone. So it's actually proof of the failure of gun control. Same thing goes for David Hogg. He should know that. He probably does. But they're both leftists. And leftists aren't real worried about the truth. They're certainly not worried about facts and evidence. Now, something else that affects David Hogg. They pushed after the Parkland High School shooting for more gun controls, and Florida put in place waiting periods for long gun purchases. They raised the age for long gun purchases from 18 to 21. They put in place gun confiscation orders. They basically gave the left everything they wanted, except, of course, they would also want an assault weapons ban. They didn't get that. But they gave the left everything they wanted after Parkland. None of it stopped the shooting. Folks, the point is simply this. Gun control, I mean, I've said this time blue in the face. I'm going to say it again. If you're drinking your coffee or if you're Martine and Ron and you have dinner guests over right now and you're listening to the podcast in the background, just stop and think about this. Gun control does not stop evil people. It empowers them. See, the discussion after Jacksonville, far from being, oh, we need more laws, we need more restrictions on guns, far from that. The conversation after Jacksonville should have immediately been, how can we be sure that law-abiding citizens are able to have guns with them for self-defense next time this happens? See, that's important. Jacksonville Landing, the mall where the tournament was held, didn't just say we ban firearms. But they went out of their way in their ban to make clear that even concealed carry permit holders, individuals who went through the training and background check to legally carry a gun for self-defense, they made clear that those folks could not carry either. So you're one of the most law-abiding citizens as a concealed carry permit holder. And if you go to Jackson Landing for a video game tournament or to shop or whatever, they're telling you, mandating that you be defenseless while you're there. Folks, that kind of policy's got to stop. That kind of policy has to stop, period. It's not natural. And when you put humans in an unnatural position, what happens? Death. Oh, that's a little extreme, some of you say. I don't know that death necessarily happens because they're in an unnatural position. Well, I do. It was unnatural to be defenseless at Sandy Hook. It was unnatural to be defenseless at Orlando Pulse. It was unnatural to be defenseless at the Parkland High School. It was unnatural to be defenseless at the community college in Oregon. It was unnatural to be defenseless at the D.C. Navy Yard, at the Jacksonville Landing Mall where the tournament was held. On and on I can go. At the Aurora movie theater. That movie theater in Aurora demanded that you disarm before you go in and watch a movie. Unbelievable. Let me just say this, and I'm going to move on. I don't want to get stuck here, but I do want to say this. Gun-free zones are killing fields. That's the lesson from Jacksonville. You have to keep that in mind as you go forward and you hear all the arguments that are now going to be made for gun control. Don't believe them? Think about it this way. A lot of the news this week was Chicago. Think about this. 9 people were wounded, 2 were killed in Jacksonville. And the left rises up. Time for more gun control. Well, guess what? Over the same weekend, at least 28 were wounded and 2 were killed in Chicago. Did you hear him mention that? I'm strange. I didn't hear Shannon Watts point to the ongoing death toll in Chicago. I didn't hear that. It's like Chicago can't be mentioned because gun control has failed there so bad. They don't even want to mention it because to draw attention to it is to undercut the gun control argument. I want you to think about this. I'm going to give you dates. I know this probably isn't a good move in an audio setting where we're not communicating visually, but I'm going to try to say it in a way. I'll just read it. I hope this soaks in. So over the most recent weekend in Chicago, at least 28 were shot, at least 28, and 2 were killed, okay? Now think about this. Over the weekend of August 18th to 21, more than 50 were shot in Chicago. Now the weekend before that, 33 were shot. And the weekend before that, over 70 were shot. I'm just talking about August now. Now I am not good at math. I'm really not. I'll be honest with you. Part of the reason I did a PhD in history is because I knew I wouldn't have to add a lot of numbers together or get too deep into fractions. If I get too far away from 1/4 or 1/4, I should say, or 1/3 or something like that, I've waded into water that's too deep for me. That being said, even I can figure out what's going on here. In the most recent weekend, we have 28 shot at least. The weekend prior, we have 50. So we're at 78. The weekend before that, we have at least 33. So if I'm right, that puts us at 111. The weekend before that, we have over 70. So we are at least 181 folks shot in Chicago in August alone. We're not done with the month. 181 shot in August alone. Shannon Watts had mentioned it. I don't remember David Hogg, trying to shame the Democrat senators in Chicago into doing something. And the reason is Chicago is a poster child for the failure of gun control. And the left operates this way. They don't admit their failure. They just push for more control. Folks, you just got to dig in. You really do. Now, this brings me to a point that I didn't think I would come to, but it's flowed this way, so I want to say it. As you get closer to these November midterms, you better make time to vote. Because if we do not hold the House, the Democrats are going to spend the next 2 years, trying to get pro-gun Trump out of office, whether they have to do that via impeachment, via investigations that just simply make it impossible for him to get things done, or whatever they have to do, they're going to do that. So we have to hold the House in order to hold our Second Amendment. We really do. So plan to vote in November. If you're in a state that still has a primary between now and then, you plan to vote. Be involved. And listen to Evan. I mentioned Evan last week. He's the guy who reached out and wants to be sure I use something other than heathen when I discuss anti-Second Amendment people. And so for Evan, instead of saying heathen right now, I just want to say these freedom haters. How's that, Evan? Freedom haters. These freedom haters are waiting. They're waiting for any opportunity to take away your ability to keep and bear arms. Don't doubt this. You've seen the subtle shift from quote-unquote assault weapons ban to a ban on semi-automatics. They're going for all they can go for. And when something like Jacksonville happens, they're ignoring the fact that it was a gun control failure, and they're just pushing more gun control anyway. And when something like Chicago happens, and it happens every day in Chicago, they completely ignore it, because to acknowledge it is to undercut their template. This is how the establishment media reports things too, so that you're not even aware of the bloodshed in Chicago, so that you're not even aware of it. It's not honest, and it's certainly not the kind of reporting that someone would call true journalism, but it's what they do. And the only way to beat them is to win at that ballot box in November. Don't doubt it. We're going to have a guest for the second segment that I'm pretty excited about having. I've been friends with him for a few years, acquaintances, friends, and I say that because I don't want to state my relationship with him stronger than it is, because all of our communication been over cell phone and email. But I reviewed a book for him that he had coming out a few years ago, and he former member of SEAL Team 10, Carl Higbie, and I'm thrilled to have him on. And he's going to talk about something that I think is crucial. He's going to talk about where this push for red flag laws, which are the gun confiscation orders, where this push is really going. And the way that push is impacting family court hearings. And to be honest with you, what it boils down to is that your Second Amendment rights, whether they stand or fall, comes down to the attitude of the judge that you have in family court, because there is a bias against guns that has permeated all these things. And I see it as a cause and effect situation, where a great deal of the cause is the acceptance of red flag laws and gun confiscation orders, whereby a judge in a certain state that has such laws, That could be Florida, California, Vermont, wherever. A judge in one of those states can order police to go to your house and take your guns away. Those laws have been accepted by some people. And by that, I mean, people have put enough pressure on their politicians that their state-level politicians have actually put those laws in place. That's a paradigm shift. And once we began accepting confiscation at that level, it was not long till it permeated more than just the orders. And you see it in family court now. And that is what Carl will talk about when we get back from the break. You're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Jeannie in Pennsylvania.
I think we've gotten away from what we really hired him to do, which is draining the swamp. If you look at the real picture of draining a swamp, you go in and you take all the water out of it. What does it leave? It leaves the gunk. He cannot get rid of the gunk. We have to get rid of the gunk. Everything he's doing, he's lowering the water so we can see who needs to go. The only way they can go is if we vote them out.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. Listen, have a Carl Higbie, formerly SEAL Team 10. I've worked with Carl a little bit. He put a book out a few years ago, and I did some reviewing on it. And so I worked with him a little bit there. I've always appreciated his love of country, of course, and his service to country. But Carl's joined us today to talk about the kind of situation you can face in this red flag law scenario that's kind of sweeping the country right now. Carl took a real close blow on his guns, and he's going to tell us. I don't want to run ahead of him, but this is what bothers me when we start talking about a spouse or an ex-spouse or a friend or a family member being able to file a complaint or do whatever, and your guns are gone. Mm-hmm. And Carl's going to be able to talk about this. So, Carl, thank you for making time to join us.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Just give us a succinct overview of what you went through or how it came to be that you were at risk of losing your guns.
Well, it's funny. I was going through a divorce, and everything was relatively civil. And then all of a sudden, we started going to court. And there was, the NRA did a documentary on this too. And immediately, my ex-wife, who was a concealed carry permit holder herself, her entire family had concealed carry permits, some of which I certified. And she said, well, I don't want you to have a gun around your daughter. I mean, you think about this, it's like, why? I'm the good guy with a gun, former Navy SEAL, perfect safety record. I'm the poster child for gun ownership. I'm the good guy with a gun. So she says, well, it came down to money. She wanted more money, or to make my life difficult, or some variation of that was always what it came down to. It had nothing to do with the actual firearm itself. But that was her staple, and I think it was her lawyers. Her lawyer was the architect of this. And so we went to battle. We agreed on almost everything else in the separation, except for the guns. So she pushed that, hoping that I would make concessions elsewhere. During court, she claimed that I handed my, at the time, 3-year-old daughter a loaded firearm, which, AW, nobody with any gun. Yeah. Nobody would I don't hand adults loaded firearms. So that was the beginning of this case. So long story short is we went to court, and the first judge says, I agree. You should not have a firearm around your daughter. I said, why? Because I don't have to tell you that. And it was the fundamental fact that I faced at that point was the fact that I was in family court, subjected my firearms to confiscation, restriction, anything like that. Now, I had a valid permit. Perfect safety record, no crimes on my record whatsoever. There's no reason for this. Better trained than law enforcement, top of the spear of the military. I couldn't see a reason why he wanted to take this away. And I sat in front of the judge, and he could not give me an explanation other than, yeah, that's not the case. So we appealed it. My attorney, Rachel Baird, who's an NRA-based attorney, she took the case on, helped me out pro bono. And we went to the next judge, and she put me on stand, and I testified, and I said, Your Honor, under the Second Amendment I have the right to bear arms. Heller versus DC reinforces the individual's right. And under Connecticut, Article 1, Section 15 says that all citizens have the right to bear arms in the Constitution state, ironically enough. And then 2937I, which is the Connecticut state statute, governs how you can possess a firearm when a minor is present, all of which I was in compliance with. And I said, I'm asking to abide by the law, nothing more, nothing less, no special treatment, no special restrictions. Simply because my ex-wife doesn't want me to have one is not a reason.
Right.
And that was, we ended up getting that ruling overturned. But then we had to go to an actual higher court for the full divorce, where it was completely relitigated. And once again, my Second Amendment rights were on trial.
Huh. See, what's crazy here. How do you defend your 3-year-old daughter if you're not armed?
Well, that's what I said. The judge had many questions for me, one of which was, he said, well, what if your daughter took your gun from you? I said, that's not going to happen. I can guarantee you that. He said, well, why? How can you guarantee me that? I said, because I spent 9 years of my life as a SEAL, much of which was in Iraq, with hostile military-age males trying to take my gun, and 0 of them got it.
Right.
Next question was, well, what if you fall asleep? I said, look, I went 7 days without sleep during SEAL training. I think I can handle 2 dinners a week and every other weekend.
Right. What's crazy here is if he used that same logic, he could take the gun away from any father in America. I mean, and as you say, your firearms training goes far beyond what most people get, far beyond. But if you use the argument that, well, you can't have a gun around your 3-year-old daughter, how many fathers would that mean automatically will have to give up their guns? Because they carry concealed when they take their daughter to dinner, so they're ready to protect her. They carry concealed when they go to Walmart with their daughter, so they're ready to protect her. I mean, there's no logic in what they're saying. It's just a bias against the Second Amendment. And that's what makes me so nervous about all this.
The irony is that Connecticut literally is called the Constitution state. And they used to be the #1 gun manufacturer in America. That's no longer the case due to regulations and bad policies. But the thing that I find so prejudiced about this whole thing is simply because I was getting a divorce, subjected a fundamental right to restrictions. Now, there was no restrictions placed. She wasn't seeking restrictions on her brothers, who carry guns all the time, who are far less trained than I am. And she wasn't seeking restrictions on her right to bear arms because she had a gun permit at the time. This is something that everybody needs to be on alert about. Is family court is the new battleground for the Second Amendment, because what they're doing is they're leveraging people's children against their right. And the first judge, the one who told me that I couldn't have guns around my daughter, said, what's more important, your daughter or your rights? That's not a fair choice to put somebody in.
It's not a fair choice, especially when both her right and your right to life are paramount, and carrying a gun is your way of defending that right for both of you. I mean, the judge is just, yeah.
And when the NRA did a documentary on it, her lawyer threw a tantrum and basically forced me to write an email to the NRA requesting that certain images be taken down. This is the problem: is these courts are literally the enemy of freedom. Look, it's not my ex-wife. Like ex-wives do fundamental things that are vindictive in courts all the time. But I don't fault her. I fault the court system for even entertaining this.
Right. But ultimately, you beat it even in the second court when it was relitigated. Folks, listen to this now. Please listen. Carl is a former Navy SEAL 10 guy. He's the best of the best. And if it can happen to him, trust me, it can happen to any of us. Mm-hmm. And that's why this is so important to hear. And I know that the bias is there. I know we've embraced the bias with all of this openness to this person can complain and they confiscate your guns. That person can complain, they confiscate your gun. This was a very slippery slope. I know people hate that terminology, but it's the only way to say it. This was a very slippery slope when we entered upon it, and we see what it has turned to when you hear Carl's story. I mean, is your message mainly, Carl, that you're taking from this to people is, folks, we've created a monster here in the family court system, and your guns are in danger, your fundamental rights are in danger? I mean, is this the message that we need to communicate to people?
Yeah, it is. And the big issue here is I want people to, and this is what my attorney said. She was like, you're the first person I've ever litigated this with. And she's been with dozens of clients like this, that's willing to go the distance and you know, to roll the dice and really go the distance. And that's what I tell people. Like, if you sacrifice your rights, then your kids won't get to grow up in the same country. And that's why the rights are so important. So when I was asked, what's more important, your rights to your daughter? I said, well, fundamentally, the rights are more important than everything, because then my daughter doesn't have the same country and the same opportunities I have. And if they can take this right, what can they take next and then next? And it's a creeping gradualism. And I've had dozens of people across the country who saw the NRA video, who reached out to me through my website and on Twitter and things like that to say, hey, we used your case as precedent in mine and we won. You know, I retained my right to carry.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm being honest with you, Carl. I'm kind of dumbfounded over this. I mean, it's unreal that we've reached this point, but I agree with your attorney. I mean, that you had the courage to fight is what made the difference here, because so many people would just roll over, and I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah. And that's the problem, is people don't roll over because, you know, they're not principled people or things like that. They roll over because their children are being dangled in front of them as you have to choose your guns or your kids. And that's not a fair thing to say, because they're two unrelated issues. And if I can't have a gun, if I can't teach my daughter how to use a firearm, if I can't exercise those rights and those liberties and honestly part of my culture with my child, then who can?
Right.
I mean, I'm the poster child for this.
This is crazy. Well, Carl, let's transition a little bit. I know you told me you started a new podcast,
Liberty and Cocktails.
Liberty and Cocktails. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
So Liberty and Cocktails kicked off about a month ago, and my opening week was Mike Flynn, Mike Huckabee, Judge Janine, Anthony Scaramucci. So we've had some mega guests on recently, and it's been one of those things where I had to resign from the Trump administration over some comments I made over half a decade ago that CNN used to progress their agenda, let's say. So I wanted to tell my story, because the problem is there's been 320 resignations from the Trump administration under terms of something that's been dug up or said, or things that were previously never a problem until CNN made them a problem. So I wanted to tell the whole story. I wanted people to know exactly who I was. And I started this podcast, and it's a chance for people to come together and really talk about the issues. And look, we disagree about stuff, and that's fine. That's what I want. I want you to disagree. I want you to prove me wrong. I want you to bring facts to the table that maybe are not the ones that I understand. And if you can have that argument, there's no shouting down. I hate the fact that the left says, "Oh, I disagree with you, so now you're racist, and I'm going to shout you down as a Nazi." That crap doesn't fly on this podcast, because you bring the facts, you bring the real issues, and then you discuss them. And you know what? We can agree to disagree.
Right. Folks, think about what Carl's told us, both about the family court situation and his podcast. And understand, I can't say it enough. If it can happen to a former Navy SEAL team member, it can happen to you. It can happen to anybody. We've got to change the climate, this anti-Second Amendment climate. We have to change it. And folks, make time to go to iTunes and find Carl's podcast, Liberty and Cocktails, and subscribe to it and listen to it, and listen to his guests speak and exchange ideas on topics dealing with freedom. Carl, thank you for making time to join us. Man, I know you're busy. I appreciate you making time. I always appreciate your service and the way you fought for liberty for this country. But thank you for making time to be with us.
Well, thanks, AW.
You're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
A lot of people not knowing what action they could or should take to make the difference. What I do is try to turn people on to sites like Breitbart, people who are writing and publishing the truth so that people will get educated. But, you kind of can't blame productive members of society who are kind of confused, perplexed as to what do we do to take this government back.
Sirius XM Patriot Channel 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. Higbie's experience is important. Keep it in mind. As I said, if it can happen to a former Navy SEAL, it can happen to anybody. Tech mogul John McAfee, he really said something this week that's very important. I need to highlight it. He talked about even though, of course, with all his money, he can afford a security detail and all these things. He keeps a gun with him personally at all times, and he makes that clear. And he said this is very important. He said, if we are all armed, we are all equal. And what he was doing was reacting to someone who had seen a picture, and in the picture he had a sidearm with him, and as the left usually does, they just went ballistic. They couldn't believe he had a gun. I mean, he's only one of 100 million people, I guess, that have one, or 120 million. I mean, it's not like he's in the minority is the point, but it was so refreshing to hear him defend gun ownership. If we are all armed, we are all equal. And if you think about it, he's exactly right, because if only some of us are armed, and by that I mean if only some of us have the ability to be armed, well, that means we get slowly put in a place where might makes right. When the populace is denied the right to keep and bear arms, they are denied the ability to defend their freedom and their lives. And slowly and surely people will take advantage of them, and slowly and surely people will kill them. If you think that's a little extreme, well, it wouldn't come to that. Well, what's happening in Chicago? What's happening in Baltimore? What's happening in gun-free zones around this country? There's no equality without a gun, folks. There's just not. And if you think there is, well, you're kidding yourself. You're looking at the world through rose-colored lenses. You really are. There's not equality in the sense that we all will be treated the way we would want to treat others. It's not going to happen unless we are armed to defend ourselves. Don't ever forget it. Folks, had some great Second Amendment stories this week. A home intruder ignored an elderly couple's. So the elderly couple had a sign in their yard that said Smith & Wesson spoken here. Now, the only way that sign could have been clearer is if it had said, "You come in, we will shoot." But the intruder ignored anyway, went into their home, and they shot him multiple times. Now, he stripped naked after that and ran out and was going to attack the sheriff's deputies who had showed up. They tased him. The taser didn't work. They're finally able to subdue him. They believed that he was on some kind of drug that had him so jacked up that neither the gunshots, the pain from the gunshots, nor the taser affected him. He survived, but the lesson still learned, and that is this, that the elderly couple was not harmed. The elderly couple was not only old, and I don't say that disrespectfully, but they also had some disabilities. Folks, they were able to survive because they had a firearm. And this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Folks, we had a Mexican national who went just crazy on a bus, pulled a knife on a Greyhound bus, attacked the driver wrecked. So the whole bus wrecks just south of Denver. The Mexican national kicks out a window, climbs out of the bus. He's going to make his escape. But no. An armed citizen who saw what was happening or saw the distress of the bus and such, walks up, pulls a gun, and holds that attacker at gunpoint until police arrive. This story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. We had a man in California holding an infant, 31-year-old man. He's at his girlfriend's cousin's home helping her study math, and a fight breaks out. The people fighting are told, "You can go outside or we'll call the police." They go outside. And the man holding the infant goes outside to try to talk him out of fighting, and one of them gets mad and comes up. While the man is holding the infant, they begin to beat him about his head. They beat him the attacker beats him so bad that he drops the baby. He catches the baby before it hits the ground, but he drops it. The attack continues, and finally, with no other recourse, the man holding the baby pulls a gun and kills the attacker. The man holding the baby was a concealed carry permit holder, legally possessing, legally carrying that gun. The attacker, they put him in a bag, zipped him up, and I guess at the proper time, they'll drop him in the ground. Or cremate him, whatever his option or his choice was there, but that's that. The man holding the baby survived. The baby survived. The infant, I should say. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. We had a woman in Pierce County, Washington. This is hard to believe. I mean, it's not. What I mean is, you ever hear that saying, truth is stranger than fiction? She's on her motorcycle. A 60-year-old man keeps trying to bump his car into her. At stoplights, he pulls up beside her, trying to either to knock her over or to pin her leg against the side of the cycle so she can't escape. Eventually, he jumps out of his car at one of the lights and begins to beat her. And he reaches up and he grabs her helmet and he's trying to pull it off. He chest bumps her so hard she goes over against the guardrail. And he's beating her. And he's beating her. And he's beating her. She's 24 or 25 years old. He's 60. His wife's sitting in the car. The woman said at one point, while he was following her, she looked in her rearview mirror on her cycle, and she saw the wife's just mouth gasping open, could not believe what the husband was doing. Eventually, the girl remembers she has her handgun with her. She pulls it out of her jacket. She shoots him and kills him. Lesson 1, he should have known better. Lesson 2, folks, you never know when or where the attack is coming, so you have to be prepared. You just do. The girl survived. She wanted to get home that night because she had a date. That's all she was thinking about. And this man tried to end her life. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Folks, thanks for listening to the podcast this week. Hope you can get your friends, your family members, your coworkers to subscribe and listen as well. We need all the subscribers we can get. And go to the front of the podcast and give us reviews. We need all the 5-star reviews we can get. And between now and the next time we're together, continue to reach out to me, AWR Hawkins at Breitbart.com. Check me out on Twitter at AWR Hawkins, on Instagram at AWR_Hawkins. And email those photos to me, email your stories to me. Just stay in touch. Until we're together again, remember, more guns equal more freedom.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
Everything in hip-hop is not bad. Kanye agreed with us, so let's love him today until he raps tomorrow and you turn your back. Because if you jump off when the fun of the moment is over, then you are in fact making Kanye the token he is accused of being. So please, don't do that. Don't go there.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.